Okay, well, it wasn't very clearly explained there. I want to just be clear that what they have ruled in the British ruling is that they reject the idea that the word woman can have any variable meaning, and that the British equality laws apply to those people who are born as women or men, and not people who have a gender identity certificate, which is a legal status and not a biological status, according to the ruling. Now, I am joined on set here by Flora Bolter, who is co-director here in France of the LGBTI plus group. Hi, thank you very much. Great to have you with us. First of all, I do want to explain, because there's a lot of confusion around this. Intersex is something different to trans. Intersex is people born with both sets of sexual organs, and at their birth, the doctors and the parents make the very difficult decision to assign one or other sex to that person. I understand. That's very different to trans people.
That would be a definition, but that it could be a definition. It's people whose sex characteristics do not match exactly the idea of what a biological man or biological woman is in terms of their genitalia, let's say, also in terms of chromosomes and other sexual characteristics. So, but it is one of the questions that this decision gives rise to, which is what is a biological definition of a woman. This is not a discrete notion, because, for instance, you will have intersex persons who will be registered as girls at birth and will be identified as women, and that doesn't fall very...
But that is a very separate category from trans. So can we maybe leave aside for our discussions now intersex, where I think most medical information I've read says they were born with some parts of both sexual organs, and for the sake of beginning a life, the parents and the doctors make a difficult decision. That, I think everybody would understand, is quite a separate, difficult and extremely unusual situation. I want to move on because we are limited for time on this transgender.
1.7% of all births. So it's not a completely uncommon situation.
No, but it's not really what this ruling is about, I think, is it?
More than the trans population,
okay.
Actually.
If we can move on, because I think this ruling is really about the definition of women and this discussion. So the judge said that in Britain's law, the Equality Act is to apply to people born as women and not people who have a gender identification certificate or who self-identify as women. And he went on to say that trans people would already be protected under existing laws which cover the discrimination against minorities, and he seemed to hint that that might be reinforced. Are you happy with that ruling?
Absolutely not. I'm disappointed. I'm not surprised, because the law is indeed unclear regarding the definition of what a woman is. But there is no simple, obvious answer to this question. And in fact, even saying that we should have a biological definition of what a woman is an entire question in and of itself, because there is no satisfactory definition of biological woman based on chromosomes. That would exclude some women. If you base it who are born female in this decision, cisgender women. So that can be problematic, and it's not a very obvious decision. But it is true that the 1975 Sex Discrimination Act certainly did not envision the possibility of trans women falling under that scope. It's also, to me, it's also a question regarding the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 and the legal consequences of the recognition, because that was the whole question of the 2018 decision of the Scottish ministers in the initial decision, because the law has been interpreted, the Equality Act has been interpreted to cover trans women, and in this case, the judge says that indirect discrimination can be used as a concept. And it could cover some cases, but it does give rise to a number of questions that are not solved by just stating that in law there is a biological definition. because it is not in context. The law has been interpreted in different ways, and this means that we would have to change completely the interpretation of the law so far.
Well, I think a lot of people would argue with your suggestion that it is not possible to identify biologically women for the most part. Nothing is 100%. I take that. But law has to be based on broad science and medical knowledge. And I think most people would agree that there is a broad idea of a biological woman. The question then is whether that is the only kind of woman. And that is what they have been looking at. I noticed that you represent as well gay and lesbian people, as do many of these groups. And he alluded to a conflict of interest there. He said that lesbian women had been in the forefront of some of the fight over this issue, saying that lesbian-only spaces were threatened by people who were saying they were women, but who the lesbian people taking issue with this said were men. That's very difficult for you.
It's actually
speaking for both parties.
This is absolutely not. I would not say that lesbians are against trans rights and
I'm not saying that.
of trans women as women. This is actually incorrect.
He said that they were.
I know. Some charities, such as the LGB Alliance, which has submitted an amicus brief in this case, argue that lesbians want to have single-sex spaces that do not include trans women, but that does not correspond to polls made on women and specifically lesbians and bisexual women do recognize trans women as women and do not wish to exclude them from single-sex spaces. This is a minority of lesbians who are very vocal, but who are a very small minority. It's over 80% of lesbians recognize trans women as women. So the question is only valid for a very small subsection of the population, and it's also to me it's also a question that concerns that is a bit biased, because nobody is making the question of intruding on private circles, and a bar, for instance, which can have a policy of its own regarding who it will admit inside or not. That is entirely its decision. But that doesn't mean that you have to exclude trans women from legal protections, not generally, to be able to have single-sex spaces that only cater to one specific subset of the lesbian population.
I think we're going to have to move on. It's a really interesting subject. We are out of time, though. That law, of course, does say it provides for the protection of all minorities, including trans women, but that they are not to be seen in the same way as biological women, just clarifying what the ruling was there in London.